Welcome back to this section of Tanzu application platform. And in part 3, we're now going to install the TAP components on each of our 4 Kubernetes clusters. So let's just go ahead and list those. Okay, we have our 1 AKS cluster and 3 EKS clusters. And you can see why I rename the EKS clusters. So we don't have to type all of that out. We can just use those names. Now, the other thing is to just list out all the packages that have been downloaded to our cluster's local repository here. So this was the effect of our last video. So these are the packages that are ready to be installed for us. And if I go ahead and list all of the installed packages, will have an empty list. Perfect. Now, before we get started here, I just want us to have a refresher here by going over to the reference architecture diagram on the docs page for VMware. Now, we're going to run a script per each of our 3 clusters. And in this video, we're going to install all of the components you see listed here for our TAP View cluster. Now, we're going to be mentioning what's called a profile. So we'll configure the TAP View cluster with a view profile so that TAP knows that these are the components to install. And we'll see what that looks like in the configuration file in just a moment. So back in our script, you'll see that the files that we're going to run is in tap/CLI/supply chain. And we're going to run is the out-of-the-box basic view to run. Now, it's 2 run because there's 2 run clusters. Our EKS is one and AKS is the other. If I was just running one cluster, and if you're just running one cluster, you can go ahead and just use this script as well. Now, another distinction that I want to point out is why the folder is named CLI. And that's to differentiate it from the GitOps. So TAP does support a GitOps model for installing TAP itself. Okay, so you'll see here that there's one script, and this script will configure TAP based on declarative configurations hosted in our GitHub repository. And another thing is that this only installs one profile. So what does that mean? Or full profile. That means that it's going to install all 3 of the components, all 3 of those stacks, the view, build, and run, on one single EKS cluster. And that is definitely something that you might want to do if you're just hosting this for a developer team or something like that, or for testing. Definitely not recommended for production. Now back over here to the supply chain folder. So we've got our 2 run script that is ready to go. Now, before we go ahead and execute it, let's just go ahead and run down what's going on here. So again, 1.6.1 is our TAP version. This Git catalog repository is for setting up the component libraries or the components that we have listed in the TAP portal or TAP GUI. I probably will interchange those words, TAP GUI and TAP portal. TAP GUI is probably the one that is used most often, especially in the documentation. Then we have this view domain. So for each of our clusters, we're going to have subdomains. Okay, so in this case, we have view.tap.nycpivot.com. This is our root domain. And this will be our subdomain, and we will append the TAP GUI. Let's go over to Route 53 and take a look, see what this looks like. Now, for starters here, I just want to show us something, a bit of a hack. In the script, I attempt to automate this whole process so that you don't have to come here. But the only caveat is that I'm picking off the hosted zone on top of the list. Now, I didn't want to complicate the script by querying the user to input the hosted zone name and then coming back to AWS and grabbing the hosted zone ID. It was just too much. So for sake of simplicity, if your hosted zone is not on top, you'll go ahead and have to change the script. So let's go into here now, and you'll see on the bottom half of the screen here, all of these are all for TAP. Not necessarily for our cases. Again, we're not using an iterate cluster. This TDP is the separate Tanzu developer portal product. We can ignore that, but you'll see otherwise we have, and this one too can be ignored. So this would be the one for a full profile. Other than that, we've got our AKS, EKS, and View. Now, you do not need a domain name for build. Okay, there's no reason for us to type in the URL for our TAP build cluster. It's not publicly accessible. I don't see why you would want to do that anyway. So in our view.tap, so you can see they're all prefixed with asterisks. These are going to be set up with ingress, subdomain, and so forth. Now you see here that I already have something existing here. What I want to do actually is, so that we do see this change, I'm just going to set this to some nonsensical CNAME record. Okay. This is going to change. Okay. This is just for the purposes of a visual clarification of what's going to happen. So actually, if we come over here, and we view, this will probably take a few seconds. Oh, okay. So you'll see that it comes to, okay, I thought it would go to the Google search, but you can see obviously Google doesn't like it coming in with that URL, but nevertheless, you can see that we're hitting a Google page. That's the only intention here, because this URL will change through our automated script. Okay, so as we scroll down now, we're setting up variables for our clusters. Now, this section right here is just to delete everything that I install. Sometimes I have to make a configuration change that isn't remediated by just a simple update of the cluster. And sometimes I just find it better to just wipe everything out and start over again. So that's exactly what this is doing. Now, in most cases, especially in this series, we probably only need to delete this. These are other add-on features with different settings for testing and scanning, running unit tests, and the static code analysis that we talked about. Now, in this section here, we're creating this long configuration to set up a service account and cluster role binding and all of that, so that we can give access to our view cluster to be able to call APIs on our build and other run clusters. So that's exactly what this is doing. For the most part, it's all read-only, get, list, watch. So this will give our view cluster, because we want to extract metrics, health, status, and those types of things from our other 3 clusters. So we can display that in the TAP GUI. Okay, so we scroll down past this, and what we do is, this part is important. So in order to get all of this connectivity happening, we first go ahead and set the context to our TAP build cluster, and then go ahead and apply that above YAML we just looked at. Okay, then we create a Kubernetes secret that will create a token that the view cluster will then be able to use to authenticate it to the build cluster. And so we apply that secret, and then we access the URL of our build cluster here by looking in kubeconfig, and then we get that token that we just created from the secret. And we'll see where we use that in just a moment. So we basically just repeat the same thing. We go ahead and now connect to our EKS cluster, apply that service account, the secret, and then go ahead and get the URL for the EKS and the token. Again, AKS cluster, apply the secret, and get the URL and token. So this is where we get to installing the view profile itself. And this is what the profile we would set it to in the view. Now, in that Git ops that we talked about, where I explained a full profile, which just installs all of it on one cluster, we would just set profile to full. So that just pointing that out to distinguish that this is the means whereby TAP knows what components it needs to install. And so for our build, this will be set to build, and run, this will be set to run. Okay, now I'm not going to get into all of this here. This is just kind of like a global variable of sorts so that we don't have to continually specify our domain that we showed above. This is all kind of fluff here, just setting up cosmetics and so forth in the portal. The piece that I'm interested in here is right here, the cluster locator method. So all of those tokens and the builds, the URLs and so forth that we needed to get from each of our clusters is set in this section. This will give the View cluster, our tap GUI portal, access into our other clusters. So it's going to use the service account and the token. Perfect. Okay. And so as we scroll down here, and so that's the next section here where I think we're ready to go here. This is the line that's going to go ahead and install tap on our view using the view profile only. And this values file parameter here will pass in this configuration setting that we just looked at above. Okay, and this is our 2 run clusters. So there it is. It's deleting things that aren't there yet, of course, but if it was and I wanted to reset. Okay, so scrolling down now, this will take about maybe 10 minutes or so. So what we do next is once we've installed all of the packages, it takes some time to reconcile those packages. And the package that we need to have reconciled is going to be the ingress, the system ingress. So that's why we're going to go ahead and wait here on this line so that the contour package will get a successfully reconciled message. So I'll go ahead and pause the video here until that happens.